In 1917, the world was at war, and fear ran thicker than blood. In the middle of this chaos stood a woman draped in silks, her movements hypnotic, her eyes daring, her reputation scandalous. She was known as Mata Hari, a name that whispered mystery, seduction, and danger. But before she was the most infamous spy in history, she was Margaretha Zell, a Dutch girl born in 1876 in the small town of Leeuwarden. Her childhood was far from the world of espionage and exotic dance. Raised in comfort at first, Margaretha adored her father, a hatmaker who spoiled her with luxuries. But when financial ruin struck, followed by her parents' divorce and her mother's sudden death, the illusions of security shattered. At just 15, Margaretha became a young woman adrift. With little guidance, she learned early that the world wasn't kind to women without money, name, or connections. And yet, she carried within her an ability to captivate, to command attention, qualities that would both elevate her to global fame and ultimately lead her to a tragic firing squad. This is the story of Mata Hari. But was she truly a cunning spy who played both sides of the Great War? Or was she a scapegoat, a woman destroyed by fear, sexism, and political desperation? At 18, Margaretha believed she had found her escape. Captain Rudolf MacLeod, a Dutch officer twice her age, stationed in the Dutch East Indies. He was wealthy, well-connected, and seemed to offer stability. To a girl who had lost everything, he looked like salvation. But the reality was far darker. The marriage was fraught with violence, alcoholism, and infidelity. Rudolf's temper was volcanic, and Margaretha endured abuse behind closed doors. In the colonies, she gave birth to 2 children, only for tragedy to strike when one died under mysterious circumstances, rumored to be poisoning. Margaretha was left isolated in a foreign land, a young mother with a crumbling marriage. To cope, she reinvented herself. She immersed in local culture, studied the art of Javanese dance, and began to weave the beginnings of a persona that would later enthrall Europe. The exotic, forbidden performer, Mata Hari, which means Eye of the Day in Malay. When she finally divorced Rudolf, she returned to her home country broken yet determined. She was now a single mother, without money, without a husband, and without stability. But she had one weapon left, her ability to enchant. In a bustling European town, during the Belle Epoque, Margaretha Zell transformed herself into Mata Hari. With her tall frame, dark eyes, and daring sensuality, she didn't just dance, she told stories with her body. Draped in veils and jewels, she claimed her movements were sacred rituals from the East. Audiences were mesmerized. Politicians, artists, generals, and wealthy aristocrats flocked to see her. She became a sensation, her name whispered across Europe. She wasn't just a performer, she was a fantasy. But beneath the glitter and applause was a woman struggling. Fame gave her lovers and wealth, but it also made her a target of envy and scandal. Newspapers called her immoral. Some admired her independence, while others saw her as nothing more than a courtesan cloaked in mystique. Still, Mata Hari understood the power of illusion. She leaned into her role as a mysterious seductress, never revealing how much of her exotic background was invention. Every performance was a mask, and soon, this ability to disguise and manipulate would make her valuable to more than just audiences. By 1914, World War I had erupted like a storm over Europe. Borders hardened, trust dissolved, and paranoia became law. For Mata Hari, life suddenly became more complicated. She was Dutch, a neutral nationality, which allowed her to travel more freely than most. And she had connections, lovers who were officers, politicians, and even royalty. To intelligence agencies desperate for information, she looked like the perfect recruit. But was she truly a spy, or just a woman caught in dangerous games? The truth is tangled. The Germans first approached her, offering money in exchange for scraps of information. Some claim she accepted, but others argue she saw it as nothing more than a quick financial arrangement. Later, the French approached her, recruiting her as a double agent. Mata Hari thought she could outsmart them all, that her charm and access to powerful men made her untouchable. But in a world of coded telegrams, secret dossiers, and shifting loyalties, she was walking a razor's edge. By 1916, Mata Hari's fortunes were fading. Audiences grew tired of her act, and the war made lavish performances nearly impossible. To maintain her lifestyle, she leaned more heavily on wealthy lovers, many of them military officers. This lifestyle fueled suspicion. How could a woman so connected to powerful men, moving across borders with ease, not be a spy? French intelligence, desperate for victories in a losing war, began to see her as the perfect target. To make matters worse, German intelligence sent a careless telegram in 1917, intercepted by the French, that mentioned Agent H-21. The French were convinced this was Mata Hari. Historians later argued the Germans may have intentionally sacrificed her, sending a message they knew would implicate her. But at the time, French officials believed they had found their traitor. The stage was set. Mata Hari was about to be trapped. On a cold morning in a French town, Mata Hari's door was flung open. French officers stormed in, placing her under arrest. She stood in shock, draped in silk, confused yet calm. She asked them for a moment to change into something respectable before being taken away. Her arrest made headlines instantly. The greatest spy of the century, newspapers declared. She was accused of passing secrets to the Germans that allegedly caused the deaths of 50,000 French soldiers. But the evidence was thin. Much of it relied on intercepted telegrams, circumstantial meetings, and her reputation as a courtesan. To her accusers, Mata Hari's independence, sensuality, and foreign persona were proof enough. To the French, she was more than a suspect. She was a symbol. They needed someone to blame for their military failures, and who better than the exotic dancer once worshipped across Europe. In July 1917, Mata Hari's trial began under military tribunal in a town courthouse. It was not open to the public. Secrecy and national security were the excuses. But behind closed doors, the stage was more like a theater than a court of law. The prosecutors painted her as a dangerous seductress, a woman who used her body to lure men into revealing secrets. They claimed she lived a life of luxury paid for by betrayal. They argued she was the reason French soldiers were dying. But what about proof? There was little. The telegrams were ambiguous. Witnesses were unreliable. Her supposed espionage missions often lined up with her performances or personal travels. Yet, in a court fueled by wartime hysteria, logic did not matter. Mata Hari herself insisted she was innocent. Yes, she admitted, she had accepted money from the Germans at one point, but she denied ever passing on meaningful secrets. She claimed she had even tried to spy for France. Her words fell on deaf ears. The French military needed a victory, not on the battlefield, but in the court of public opinion. Morale was crumbling. Soldiers mutinied. Civilians were losing faith. Executing a traitor, especially a woman who embodied decadence and mystery, would send a powerful message. And so, Mata Hari was made into a scapegoat. She was no longer a dancer or even a woman. She was an image. To the French, she became the perfect villain, foreign, seductive, and dangerous. The trial ended swiftly. The verdict, guilty of espionage. The sentence, death by firing squad. Mata Hari listened calmly. She neither screamed nor begged. But those who looked closely swore they saw the mask slip, if only for a moment, the flicker of a terrified woman beneath the legend. On October 14, 1917, Mata Hari spent her final night in a town prison cell. Witnesses described her as composed, even serene. She wrote letters, one to her beloved daughter, another to her lawyer. She asked for her favorite perfume. She dressed carefully the next morning, refusing to face death in rags. The guards watched her in awe. Here was a woman condemned to die, yet she carried herself like a queen. Some whispered she was playing her final role, Mata Hari, the mysterious enchantress, even in the face of death. But beneath the calm exterior, what must she have felt? Fear? Anger? Betrayal? We may never know. What we do know is that her story was about to reach its most haunting moment. On October 15, 1917, in the courtyard of Vincennes in a quiet French town, Mata Hari was tied to a post, her hands bound, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Soldiers stood ready, rifles aimed. Eyewitnesses swore she refused a blindfold. Instead, she faced her executioners directly, her chin lifted high. When the command was given, shots rang out, and her body crumpled. One officer, following custom, delivered the final shot to ensure death. Thus ended the life of Mata Hari, dancer, lover, mother, accused spy. She was just 41 years old. But her death did not silence her story. Instead, it gave birth to a legend. Some believed she was guilty, others swore she was innocent. Many now see her as a victim, not of espionage, but of misogyny, politics, and fear. When the gunshots echoed across the courtyard that morning, it was more than the end of Mata Hari's life. It was the beginning of her myth. News of her execution spread quickly through towns and cities, fueling both outrage and fascination. Some citizens cheered, believing that the French government had eliminated a dangerous spy responsible for thousands of deaths. But others questioned whether justice had truly been served. Could one woman, no matter how cunning, truly hold the fate of entire armies in her hands? The trial had been shrouded in secrecy, with no real evidence made public. Ordinary people whispered in cafes and taverns that she had been used as a distraction, a sacrificial figure, chosen to bear the blame for France's suffering. In her hometown of Leeuwarden, her family lived under the shadow of shame. The once playful little girl they remembered was now remembered as either a traitor or a legend. After her death, Mata Hari's name took on a life of its own. Newspapers sensationalized her story. She was called the temptress who destroyed empires, the world's greatest spy, and even a witch in silks. Yet the more the story was told, the less the truth seemed to matter. Each retelling exaggerated her powers, her beauty, and her alleged espionage. Some imagined her holding whispered conversations with German generals. Others pictured her seducing French officers for secrets. She became both a villain and a romanticized figure, a dangerous woman who had dared to live outside the boundaries set for her. Whether guilty or innocent, she was no longer just Margaretha Zell. She was Mata Hari, the eternal symbol of betrayal and seduction. In the years following her death, doubts about her guilt began to grow. Historians and journalists revisited the case, questioning whether she had truly passed any useful secrets to the Germans. The telegram that condemned her, naming Agent H21, was flimsy evidence at best. Some experts argued it had been deliberately vague, even planted, to mislead French intelligence. Others suggested the Germans never trusted her and only paid her to keep her close. What stood out most was how little concrete proof existed. At her trial, not a single piece of hard evidence had been presented to show she caused the death of soldiers. Instead, the prosecution relied on her reputation as a courtesan, her independence, and her foreignness. It became clearer with time. Mata Hari was judged not for her actions, but for her character. Mata Hari's story cannot be separated from the society in which she lived. In the early 1900s, women who defied convention were viewed with suspicion. A woman who danced half-clothed, who chose her lovers freely, who traveled alone, was seen as scandalous and dangerous. The very qualities that made her famous also made her vulnerable. Her independence, her sensuality, and her refusal to live quietly were used as proof of her guilt. In a town tribunal dominated by men, she never stood a chance. Her trial became less about espionage and more about morality. To many, she represented everything improper about women's growing independence. And in 1917, during the horrors of war, it was easier to silence a woman like Mata Hari than to face the truth of military failures. By 1917, the French army was in crisis. Soldiers were mutinying, battles were being lost, and morale was crumbling. The government needed a scapegoat, someone to blame for the chaos, someone whose punishment could restore public confidence. Mata Hari, with her exotic persona and suspicious connections, became that scapegoat. Her trial offered the French army a convenient distraction. Instead of answering hard questions about failed strategies, they could point to an outsider, a foreign woman, and declare, "She is the reason." Her execution was not just the silencing of an individual. It was a performance staged to reassure a nation that justice had been served, even if the justice was false. Behind the headlines and legends was a human tragedy often overlooked, Mata Hari's daughter, Jean. When Margaretha married Rudolf MacLeod, she gave birth to 2 children. One died young in the Dutch East Indies, but Jean survived. After her parents' divorce, Jean was raised by Rudolf's family, far away from her mother. For Jean, her mother's trial and execution must have been devastating. The woman she knew as a mother became, in the public eye, a criminal, a seductress, and a traitor. She grew up carrying the stigma of being Mata Hari's child. It's easy to forget that beyond the veil of performance and espionage, Mata Hari was also a mother, one who longed for love and stability but whose choices and circumstances left her daughter with a legacy of sorrow. Decades after her death, once classified documents began to surface. These revealed that French intelligence had exaggerated her importance. They had little evidence, and what they did present was often circumstantial or fabricated. Some files even suggested that the Germans considered her ineffective as a spy. She may have accepted money, but she was never trusted with critical information. The release of these documents painted a damning picture. Mata Hari had been executed not for espionage, but for political theater. Her death was a symbol meant to restore faith in a government losing control. As historians dug deeper, the story of Mata Hari shifted. Once branded a traitor, she began to be seen as a victim. Plays, films, and books reimagined her as a tragic figure, a woman destroyed by forces beyond her control. Some portrayals emphasized her as a master of seduction, playing a dangerous game and losing. Others highlighted her as a naive woman, too trusting of powerful men who used and discarded her. Whichever version people chose to believe, one thing became clear. The truth of Mata Hari was far more complex than the myth. Mata Hari's story is more than just history. It's a lesson in justice, politics, and gender. Her execution shows how easily truth can be sacrificed when a government needs a scapegoat. It shows how a woman's independence can be twisted into suspicion. And it shows how myths can overshadow reality, creating legends that persist long after facts fade. She reminds us that justice, especially in times of fear, can be shaped by prejudice more than proof. Her life and death warn us about the dangers of allowing image and reputation to outweigh evidence. Mata Hari's name still echoes more than a century later. To some, she remains the ultimate femme fatale, the dancer who seduced nations and betrayed armies. To others, she is remembered as a victim of hysteria, a woman executed not for her crimes, but for her identity. The truth may never be fully known. But one fact stands clear. Her story is not simply about espionage. It is about power, gender, and the cost of being extraordinary in a world that punished women for daring to live freely. Mata Hari died in a small-town courtyard, but her legend was born there too, one that still captures the world's imagination today.